that Atlanta wanted whoever was left. As long as Ryson or Worley were left, Atlanta wants one of those players. Andre Ryson, the wide receiver, who young quarterback Chris Miller might need, is there. I know Atlanta is one of the teams on the phone with San Diego because they could really use a receiver. There's a team that is starting to make a move here, Joe. A young quarterback in Miller, the couple of linebackers they drafted last year. Ryson would make sense for them. There's
absolutely.
Atlanta.
Absolutely. I really believe that they are making some good decisions. I think Atlanta's in a rebuilding situation. We saw it towards the end of the season. Their entire football team started to play better. Chris Miller, besides being a 5-handicap golfer, had a chance to go through an entire season as the quarterback. He took all the heat. He went through the growing processes. Now he's in a situation where he can assume a leadership role, and they start to put the pieces together around him. And really, you win with defense. You start winning with defense, and then you build your offense up to make it competitive. So I think Atlanta has started that way. One thing about Chicago, having 3 first-round draft choices, Chris, they can't afford to keep 3. They're not going to sign 3 first rounds. It's going to cost them too much money.
They might get 4 here.
If that happens, then they'll probably deal at least the 1. If they have 4, they'll deal 2. So I wouldn't see Chicago with any more than 2 first rounds because economics won't allow it.
The Chargers, we should mention, did go #1 wide receiver last year, so we're talking about Ryson. They drafted Anthony Miller in the 1st round and also drafted Quinn Early in the 3rd round, another wide receiver. So they've made a move towards that position. I think, Tommy, that if you're San Diego, well, you commented at the beginning that you were talking about McMahon. Would you make that move, or would you keep it and get maybe a defensive player like Grossman?
I think I would keep the choice, but that's because I see Rice, and I've only seen him in the one game where Joe actually covered that game, but he is in a different caliber, a different receiver than Early. And even with the quarterbacking problems that they have in San Diego, this kid, all you got to do is throw the ball within the 4 or 5 yards of him. I saw him on a 4th down and 42 situation where he grabbed the ball between 2 people in the end zone, Gator Bowl. This kid is the best receiver out there.
Yes, and I know Atlanta wants him. And will Atlanta get him? Will San Diego get him? What is the story? Let's go over to Bob Lee and Mel Kiper as the Chargers are certainly getting their money's worth for their time allotment, aren't they?
They certainly are. They got less now than 3 minutes. You know, one reason might be if it is a 3-way, it could be so complicated, it's going to take that long to write it all down. You know, Pete Axtell lamenting the lack of sentiment in the league. Pete, look at Tom Landry. I mean, 100,000 people honoring the folk hero yesterday throughout the Metroplex. San Diego is up. We get the specter, and we talk about it every year, Mel, of guys, and there's the Charger table is now 2.5 minutes. Players who in the weeks and days before the draft, their fortunes have risen in the eyes of the scouts. And then on draft day, you've got players who might have been picked by this point, but really start to plummet. And you get that herd mentality. Is there a player now you thought might have been gone, and if the Chargers don't take him, you can call him a plummeting pick?
I think right now you'd have to look at Tom Ricketts as one player we don't hear anything about. He was a highly ranked offensive tackle right behind Mandarich going into the year. Now nobody talks about Tom Ricketts. He had that foot problem at the end of the year, and he has slid down. It'll be interesting to see where he ends up. Tracy Rocker may have slid all the way out of the 1st round. Wayne Martin, another kid from Arkansas, a defensive lineman, could go as late as the 3rd. John Ford slid down. Sean Collins from Northern Arizona has moved ahead. Lawyer Tillman obviously has moved ahead, so he has moved down as well. But the guy who's moved up is Andy Heck from Notre Dame, a big offensive tackle. He's up to 288 pounds. You'll be hearing his name.
Has he moved up this far, though?
Not quite this far, but he could very easily be a mid-1st round pick.
But Eric Metcalf has.
Eric Metcalf, people are going to try to move up to get.
And Hartley Dykes.
Hartley Dykes is another one people would like to move up to get.
Guys are on the move. They're going up, and we
Definitely
might see Eric Metcalf. We talked about it yesterday on SportsCenter, and I think we touched on it earlier. Metcalf is a versatile guy, so he is on the move. We have 70 seconds now on San Diego's pick to be followed by Miami. But the Chargers, and again, if you've just joined us, the rumor that we first reported, the reports that we brought you on game day this morning, the possibility of Chicago trading quarterback Jim McMahon to the Chargers in return for yet another 1st-round pick for the Bears, which would give them 4 first-round selections. They already have 3. Nobody has ever had 4 number 1s. What they're about to do today with 3 number 1s, it'll be the 12th time in the history of the common draft. So Chicago is drunk with draft choices. They've got 20 today. The Chargers have needs all the way across the board. And Steve Ortmeyer, second-year man now in charge of the player personnel for the Chargers, has less than 30 seconds. Win now. That's the pressure in the league. You don't like the McMahon trade if it happens better than anybody else has.
No, not at all. I think they made a mistake a few years ago with Mark Vlasic. He went earlier than expected. Mark Malone's not the answer. No, Jim McMahon, I would rather go for Mike Elkins, a Terrence Jones, or Rodney Peete in the second round and develop him, especially Elkins and Peete, rather than make a trade of this magnitude for a quarterback who's aging and has had a lot of serious injury problems during his career.
Well, if he was healthy, and San Diego was passing. Well, Don Weiss, the executive director of the league, does have the card.
Now selected.
So they have put Miami up. But apparently the pick has been made, so I think we'll get back to the podium now because the card was on its way up in the hands of Don Weiss. And I don't think he did not write enough on that card. After years of experience, you can tell. I don't think it's a trade unless it was scribbled in ahead of time. It looked like they might have put a name down. Let's see.
San Diego Chargers select on the first round Bert Grossman, defensive end, Pittsburgh.
Well, it wasn't a trade. It was a one-line scribble. Bert Grossman out of Pitt. One of the guys who really has seen his fortunes rise over the last several weeks. This young man, 6'5", 270, every year he got better. Had a bad ankle his senior year, Mel, but really came on over the last 4 games. This guy has improved through his career, and the scouts were wise enough to concentrate, I guess, on the last 4 games this year.
Well, last 4 games are very important, Bob. The All-Star games, the Combine workout. You can see his pass rush ability. You can see how quickly he reacts to the ball. He's got the size. He's up to 270. He'll get stronger once he gets into an all-season weight training program. There's no question that Bert Grossman was the best defensive lineman in this draft. And on some teams' board, Bob, he was the #1 player in the entire draft. Not just a first-round pick, but the #1 player in the entire draft.
All right, so McMahon's trade, a rumor. Maybe there was substance to it. And I think right now, you'd have to think that they did not work the 3-way. Washington still, which was part of that 3-way matrix in the rumored San Diego, Atlanta, Washington 3-way trade, is going to have to be out there shopping for a running back. No surprise, Washington without a first-round pick. It'll be a while before we get a chance to really discuss them in depth. Miami is up. And this is a team, now, that through the years, yes, they have defensive needs, but they have continued to expend blue chip or premium, meaning first or second-round picks on defense. They haven't gone offense in the first round in quite some time, and they're going to have a pressing need to go defense again today.
They have needs on defense, but they've had them for years. And if you look at that offensive football team right now, they need a running back. And they need somebody who has that strength and that power. And a Sammy Smith has it, a Cleveland Gary has it. But if you look on the defensive side of the ball, there's a Lewis Oliver sitting there for them, who's the kind of defensive back that they're looking for. I think if you heard Don Shula during Super Bowl time, all he talked about was David Fulcher and the impact that he had with the Bengals. David Fulcher is as big as Oliver, but he only runs in the 4.65 range. Oliver runs in the 4.3s. I think right now Lewis Oliver is the best defensive player on the board, and he should be the Dolphins' pick.
A 4.3 defensive back who can hit like a hammer. Well, Pete Axtell out at Bears headquarters. Jim McMahon, at this moment, is still a Bear.
Yeah, yes, he is. It appears the deal didn't go through. There are 2 possibilities here, obviously. One thing is the Chargers could have taken Grossman and put him in a package, which will go to the Bears eventually from McMahon. I think more likely is, as I reported earlier this morning, that I think San Diego preferred the deal where they get Steve Ortmeyer, the general manager of San Diego, really likes Stan Humphries, the backup quarterback for the Redskins, where they get Humphries, offensive tackle Simmons, and a bunch of draft choices change hands, and Gerald Riggs goes to the Redskins. I think that's what we're going to see as the day goes on. Let's go back to Chris.
All right, Axe, thank you. Miami has an intriguing selection. They could pick a big back that Don Shula has been talking about, like Cleveland Gary, a guy that played fullback at the University of Miami, whose offensive coordinator, Gary Stevens, is now the offensive coordinator with them. They could go Sammy Smith. They could go defense. Here's the commissioner.
Miami Dolphins, first-round selection. Sammy Smith, running back, Florida State.
So,
Next up, the Phoenix Cardinals.
Miami, which needs defense like you read about, has decided to go for Sammy Smith, the back who on some days looks like he's the greatest player in the history of the National, or could be the greatest player in the history of the National Football League, but it's a guy that some teams were a little worried about because on some days he comes to the park like a free agent. That's not us talking, that's just scouts who I've talked to and everyone's talked to around the league. But Sammy Smith, the running back from Florida State, is another one like Worley, over 220 pounds at a tailback. Came out early like Worley, had 1 year left for eligibility, is an excellent receiver, so you know that fits in with Miami. Shula has been talking about a big back for a long time.